So Ray, thank you again for being with us here today. And for those of you that don't know me, I'm PJ, and I'm part of the Italian leadership team. I'm also the Vice President of the organization. And I'm here today to ask a few questions to Ray and to get a little deeper into what VMware is doing and what's the future. So the first question for you will be, VMware is sort of morphing into a service company. How does that impact your business, and what can we expect for the future?
Yeah, I kind of spoke about this a little bit. The impact is, I would say, one of the most significant changes that we've been going through. On the engineering side, you go back, I don't know, 5 years. VMware had a relatively constant way of producing products. You know, we get an MRD describing the features of the product, we build the product, we do a whole lot of testing along the way, and we deliver and ship the products. Thank you. We build and ship the products, approximately once a year, once every 18 months. So it was like a clock, which just kept working in that way, right? As you move into the service model, or the more delivery as a service, doesn't work anymore. So we've had to revamp engineering into a much more CI/CD type of model. We leverage a lot more I know I'm in Italy now, right? If I was in the States, I'd be lucky to get a glass of Coke or something. So because of that, it's been very significant changes. Interestingly, by the way, a lot of customers ask me the question, how do we go through those changes? Because they're trying to deal with the same change. And there's a mixture of things. Thank you. One of them is the focus on, from the highest levels of the organization, there needs to be a commitment for that change. The other part of the mix, or the other part of that is, I am surprised, I shouldn't say I'm surprised, I'm very happy to see that many of our engineers and our program managers, they actually embrace these changes. They, wants to know this is what the company's doing, this is the direction that we're going. People, I find, are very willing to say, okay, let's figure out how we're going to do this. It's a problem, we just don't solve the problem. And that was actually one of the biggest positives I saw in this. Yeah, we acquired companies, we brought in talent who had experience in how to build SaaS applications and run them and so on. But the vast majority of our key technologists and engineers were made those changes themselves. You also asked on the business side of this.
Yeah.
So today, we still have a very significant amount of our business, which is traditional licensed software. If you grab the end-of-year results that we just produced, you'll see that in the mix. But there is a growing percentage which is subscription software, and so both subscription and SaaS-delivered software. And there's probably some VMware salespeople in here, I'm not sure. But think about that. That's difficult. Somebody is used to going in and saying, I'm going to sell you an ELA for $100,000 or whatever it is, depending on the size of the deal and so on, right? And they work up through that, and there might even be tenders and all sorts of things in that mix, right? But now you're going in and saying, I'm going to sell you something for $9.99 a month, right? It's not quite those numbers, but the conceptual model is so different. And I think that's one of the changes that we are going through as well. We're having to build up this type of sales dynamic. Now, there's one very interesting part of that, and most of you are customers, right? That means that in some ways, I have to resell to you every month. And that means that you are constantly giving me feedback. I don't like that stupid part of the product. This worked really well. I want more of that, whatever it is. So it changes that relationship in a way which I think is positive. It makes us build better products. It also allows you to be a little bit more in the driving seat in terms of what's important to you and not important to you. So big shifts in that space.
Okay, along those lines, what kind of lessons have you learned from the experience with the VMware Cloud Air, for example?
I think one of the key things that we learned with vCloud Air is you cannot take the traditional way that we produce software, or we did produce software, and how can I put it? deliver that as a cloud without making sure that you have a whole bunch of people who know truly how to run a service. And the running of the service is the things that everybody talks about. You literally have the engineers who are on call 24/7. You literally have to be able to respond to, there's an outage for 15 minutes, right? But 15 minutes is knocking out a whole bunch of customers for 15 minutes. So all of those things change and mix. So I think the single biggest thing that we've learned is the speed of customer intimacy, might be the way of putting it. Understanding what's going on with the customer and how are we able to respond to that. By the way, quite often when people ask me about vCloud Air, they say, okay, now you struck this deal or did this work with Amazon and so on. Part of what we're recognizing there is that as a company, we historically have been a little bit of a Switzerland in the sense that, we give you software which allows you to manage a whole bunch of disparate type of hardware. Now we're in a model that says we give you software which allows you to manage a whole bunch of disparate infrastructure, and a whole bunch of that is multiple clouds. So, we had to, in some ways, almost go back to our roots, right? That says, this is what we do. Our job is to make it easy for people to leverage all this infrastructure. Let's go and focus on that.
Okay, great. So what's the story and strategy about the Heptio acquisition?
Yeah. First of all, the Heptio acquisition is still very new. So we only closed that, I think, just before the end of the year or early January. I can't remember. And so obviously there's some some work to do there, right? But here's what we've done internally. So Heptio is based in Seattle, and before Heptio, most of our container and Kubernetes type products were focused on PKS, which was basically partnership technologies that we worked with Pivotal, right? Now you bring Heptio into the mix, which is a pure Kubernetes story, not a platform as a service story. However, what we're seeing is customers want to be able to say, I want to use platform as a service, or I want to use Kubernetes, or I want to use both. Sometimes I want to use cloud, sometimes I want to use on-prem. So what we're saying is, how do I deliver a unified story around cloud-native application development? So what we did was we collapsed all those teams together. So there was a single team in VMware called the CNA team, Cloud Native Applications team. The leader of that team, Paul Fazzone, moved from California to Seattle so that we make it headquartered up there, work with the Heptio team. And what you're seeing now is the emergence of these products, all with the name PKS, but in fact, Heptio is a key part of those products. But you're seeing these products begin to emerge to bring this unified approach to cloud-native applications. I think that phase one of that is make sure we can give you enterprise, good quality enterprise approach to cloud-native applications. The products are PKS Enterprise, there's PKS Cloud, and so on in a mix. Now, phase two of that, which is not, I'm not announcing a product or something, but when you look at that, we are seeing the strength of Kubernetes is so impactful that we think it'll begin to lead into even some of the things I described around edge, new ways of building applications using this orchestration in a highly distributed fashion. So I see there's a long journey there of new products. Okay. But phase one is support application developers to run on our infrastructure.
Okay. And what can we expect for NSX instead for the near future?
So I think, NSX-T has just come out, I guess, a couple of months ago at this stage, right? Which was a lot of technology change underneath the hood there. A lot of that focused on how do we now have customers who operate at enormous scale, right? And so one of the things we had to do is, okay, we're operating at this scale, it's probably going to go up by another 10x. How are we going to be able to deal with that? So a lot of this was focused on how do I build and scale that infrastructure. A lot of new features put into that mix. Actually, a lot of focus on APIs. How do people get to leverage and drive NSX using public APIs? So that's NSX-T. As you move to the future, I think the first thing you're going to see is deeper and deeper integration between NSX and the rest of the VMware infrastructure. So you're seeing that in products like VCF, for instance. You're seeing that in products like App Defense or If you're not familiar with App Defense, it's a security story built right into the hypervisor, which really gets to leverage NSX. So I think the main thing is you're going to see deep integrations, because it goes back to my earlier comment. Almost every customer is telling us, I want to move up the stack. I want you to take care of this whole underlying cloud-like infrastructure for me, and that requires that integration. You're also going to see NSX playing a bigger role as we work with the public cloud providers. One of the discussions yesterday at the Google conference was around that. So I think, immediately integration, more and more what I would call hardcore pragmatic enterprise support, enterprise readiness across the board. Now, as you look further down the line, I think software-defined networking in general is potentially massively disruptive to the whole networking story. For instance, VeloCloud being out as an SD-WAN manager, now connecting that into NSX, which you're already seeing some products do that, allows you to bridge these two worlds of the remote office, and then I can leverage NSX to do everything associated with security and so on associated with that. So I think you're going to see it becoming more disruptive in terms of the core networking story that's out there. And the other space you see this in is in, I mentioned telco several times. Telco to us, to a large degree, is NFV, Network Function Virtualization. Once again, NSX begins to have a role in there. But I also want to be clear. The reality is you have lots of existing networking infrastructure, physical infrastructure and otherwise. And a lot of we want to make sure we focus on is that you get to leverage that. Once again, it's that journey, that transition that you want to make. But looking down the road, look, our core mantra is turn it into software. It fundamentally changes what you can do with it. We believe you need to do the same with networking.
Excellent. So what's the role of open source in VMware nowadays?
Yeah. With companies like Heptio, who are primarily an open source company, right? Obviously, that makes us large contributors to open source. I think in Kubernetes we're number 2 or number 3, I can't remember, but way up there in terms of the levels of contribution. So one part of that is just contributing to open source because of acquisitions and products that we made. However, we also actually look at open source as a key innovation driver. And so one of the things maybe 2 years ago, 18 months, 2 years ago, we actually created a group within VMware called OSPO, an open source program office. We hired a very well-known open source person from Intel, Doug Hondell, and his focus is on building that infrastructure around what is our best way to work with that community. So right now we have a fair amount of people in that team who just contribute straight into up into Linux, even for products we're not involved with at all, right? Partially because that is we want to make sure that we can stay well connected to that community. We look at something like blockchain. Most of our blockchain products are put directly into open source. So it's interesting. Look, we're a commercial company, and we make money selling licensed software and selling licensed software as a service. But we are trying to make sure that we can deliver to the open source community some of our innovations, work with the open source community as they are building their innovations. And I think probably, if you ask me where is most of that heat going to come from and the excitement going to come from, it's going to be around cloud native applications.
Sure.
And that's really where the Kubernetes is playing. By the way, I said Doug, I meant Dirk Horndell, sorry.
Okay. What would you suggest to our members for their career's evolution? This is something that Amy is going to tackle today as well in a specific session. Thank you.
To me, okay, this might sound a bit philosophical, but when I came out here, I had the opportunity of seeing the Duomo, the cathedral, right? And I was sitting on the like some restaurant or something you could look over at, right? And I was, okay, so this thing is like 500 years old, right? At least, right? And containers, Kubernetes, virtualization. I don't know if there's going to be people sitting there 500 years from now saying, that's a cool technology, right? So, because we operate in a world where those technologies are just changing so fast. So, you know, that type of engineering, which was around things that will live for 1,000 years, we're dealing with things that live for 2 years or 3 years, right? And so I think the key thing from a career point of view is you better be prepared to deal with change. And if your core, you know, DNA or otherwise is not able to deal with change, you might be in the wrong business, because I see no slowdown whatsoever in the change, in the emergence of new technologies, in where they're going. And so a lot of what I think is focused on is internally. What is your ability to be able to learn new stuff? What is your willingness to be able to engage in new things? What is your willingness sometimes to take some risks in terms of, hey, I'm going to dive into this new AI project. I've never done that before. My experience looking at the engineers in VMware as we've been going through some of the changes, including things like leveraging AI and so on, right? People are very ready, very willing, and very capable of changing to be able to leverage and keep up with these technologies. But it's all within, a lot of that comes from within. And so from a career point of view, I would say focus on that. Now, if your question is a little bit mundane around what are the cool things I should be looking at in terms of functions,
kind of,
cloud native applications are clearly beginning to emerge. Leveraging and understanding how to use products like Kubernetes or technologies like Kubernetes to leverage them is important. My gut tells me, though I don't see a whole lot of real applications yet, that serverless is going to be a cool and interesting technology. In my mind, it's almost the ultimate virtualization. I'm about as far as I can possibly get from the operating system, from the hardware, from the network, so I think that's going to be interesting. But I would caution, I don't actually see tons of money and products being built with that yet, but I think it's going to be there. I think you know, the bottom line is, if you're into security, you're guaranteed a job. Right? Across the board, every single customer I deal with, security. How do I manage it? How do I deal with everything, even in the non-technical side of it? Just legally, what am I allowed to do? What should I be doing, even from an ethical point of view? Those type of things pop up into the mix. So, you know, I think the CNA space and security are some of the key and emerging areas there.
Okay, excellent. So now we're taking questions from the attendees here.
I'm connecting to the last question of PJ. What is your opinion about FinOps and the role of operation in a cloud-native landscape?
The role of operations of people running those operations, right? So I'm not sure I fully understand the question, but you know, from an operations point of view, from a delivery of software point of view, if I look at our teams internally at VMware, the hardcore developers were king. They write the software, they build the products, they work with testers, they test them themselves, and so on. Now the operations teams are becoming the king at this point, right? Because in some ways, it all goes back to the key question: who is closest to the customer? And the operations teams are the teams who are close to making sure this works, the customer is successful, and so on. And so, you know, I just think you're going to see more and more of a focus on DevOps, on on those people who are operating that infrastructure more and more. I actually think, and you're seeing this already, there's a real blurring of the lines between an ops team and a dev team, right? But I can also see that when it comes to the person who gets to put up their hand and say, you will not do this now, it is more the ops person, or the person who puts up their hand and said, we must do this now because of the security implication or something like that. It is the ops person. And that's where I see the strength is there. I'm not sure I understand did I answer your question? Sorry, yeah, okay. So I guess I'm saying, if you're heavy into ops, hey, you've got an interesting and very positive career in front of you, because everything is becoming delivered as a service and so on.
Just a question about the Google stuff you mentioned multiple times. Can you dig it a little bit deeper on what's going on with Google?
Yeah, frankly, I only mentioned it just because of the immediacy of it. It literally was yesterday, right? And I'm probably not even completely up to date that everything was announced, because you know the way those things work. There's products we work on, there's things where you're going to announce, but then, you know, things get moved around and shifted at the last minute and so on. But broadly speaking, Google has put a significant focus on putting infrastructure on-prem. They've moving, I'm forgetting the name of the actual product, but it's basically Google services being available on-prem. And because of that, now they get to deal with the real on-prem universe, of which obviously VMware is a key component of that. So there was a focus on networking and how NSX would fit that in, how NSX fit into that mix. There was, I'm trying to remember what some of the announcements are. I'm sorry, if actually you Google it, there's actually, I saw there was a, yeah, Google it again. I saw there's actually even a small YouTube section of the small section where Sanjay Poonen was talking about what was going on there. Now, if the core of your question is, have we just announced the equivalent of a VMC on Google? We have not, right? It's around a whole bunch of other areas in that space. I suspect that was probably the core of your question, right? Yeah.
I wrote it down, my question. So in a vision slide, you talked about any cloud, put it together, edge, hybrid, telco, and of course cloud. So I noticed a particular interest from VMware for CSP, C for communications and cloud service provider. So the crossing point, the merging point, I suppose, is the cloud director. And since you told SD-WAN is running faster and faster, and I also see that NFV is running faster also. Components like NFV, so for example, virtual CPE and SD-WAN from VMware Cloud, aren't they overlapping products in VMware Vision?
VMware has a history of producing overlapping products. Let's be clear, right? You know, what's interesting in that, as we move more and more to delivering these products as services, the overlap begins to actually reduce, because in the past, you could actually produce a VCD and a VRA and say, sorry, these are vCloud Director and vRealize Automation. You could produce those two products and they would go to different customer bases. But if you're delivering as a service, a customer expects to, I'm logging on to your service, I expect to see, you know, I don't expect to see multiple options to do the same thing. So as you asked actually the question about one of the changes in the company, as we begin to deliver more and more as a service, it forces us to remove those overlaps. Or more to the point, it forces us to say, okay, what is the best way to solve this problem? Choose that one and do that. So we are seeing that change occurring already. Now, to your specific question on SD-WAN and, VMware Cloud and some of the other components. Some of these products we've brought in through acquisition. And so one of the things that we do when we make acquisitions is we're very careful, if at all possible, not to destroy the very value that we acquired the company for. And one of the easiest ways you can do that is if you suddenly say, hey, you got to integrate with all these systems immediately. You got to be able to figure out, you know, how to align with the rest of some VMware story. Typically, we try and balance that very carefully. And so what you see for a while is effectively sometimes products which seem to overlap a little bit with each other. And you know, but our focus is to bring those together, and I think you're going to see more and more of that because we deliver as a service. The one you didn't mention VCD, and the one customer base which is a little bit different here is I think I saw somebody from OVH and some other cloud providers is the VCCP customer base. They're the customers who take our infrastructure and then build and run their own clouds, right? Under those, in some cases for them, we will have effectively a little bit of a parallel product because they want to be able to customize and deliver their service, their particular strength for working with their customer base. And you would see some of that in the mix. So for instance, you know, you don't see us using VCD a lot necessarily in enterprises, but we use it enormously in all of those VCCP, those people who provide their own clouds. It is the core to what many of them do in terms of leveraging our infrastructure.
You speak about a lot of any cloud, any device, any application. So just what do you think about the integration of VMware with the IBM Cloud?
If you go back to the very first, okay, maybe not the very first, but very early cloud integration we did was with IBM Cloud, right? So IBM Cloud, when they offer services, they can offer VMware infrastructure on those services. It uses VCD, actually one of the products that we just mentioned there. And it is essentially that same core infrastructure that you see in VCF. Technically, now there might be devil in the details, technically you can take workloads from your on-prem infrastructure and you can say, I'd like to run that on IBM Cloud, right, on your on-prem VMware infrastructure. And those VMs, basically speaking, will move unmodified and be able to do that. So IBM Cloud is one of the key partners we have in that cloud space. And by the way, I get there's an implication of that question is, oh, you keep talking about VMC on AWS, right? Part of that is because VMC on AWS is one, it kind of was a little bit shocking to people that we did that, so I almost have to talk about it to explain it. The second part is, that is the one where we run the service. VMware runs the service. With most of the other cloud providers, such as IBM Cloud, they run that service. They have the relationships and the strength with the customers. So you've just got a difference in those two. And I suspect you or something got to do with IBM Cloud. Have you? Yeah. Okay.
Okay, that's it. Thank you very much again, Ray.
Yep.
Sadly, no one asked the question if this is VR or VDI, but